Afua, we're live.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, which I am personally super excited about. You are watching Connected Cultures. What are the connections between Africa and its diaspora? And how can these links be reinforced and leveraged to our collective advantage globally? But before we get into that dialogue, and just to keep you guys on your toes, we're going to start with a poem by one of our panelists, Dike Chukwumerije, and he is going to read you his poem, Connected Cultures. Please listen carefully as this poem goes to the root of the conversation we're going to be having today.
Thank you, Afua. So I'll go straight to the poem. Progress is not an expatriate on this continent. No. We do not need to be taught how to innovate. We only need to remember that the people of Nok in the age of stone invented the working of iron, that the Kushites created their own alphabets, that Timbuktu was a city of libraries and philosophy, and the entrepreneurs that built those camel routes across the Sahara were African. That is why that coin is called the Golden Guinea. Tell me, do you not know that how can we forget the names of our ancestors? Tell me, do you not know that this was the land that inspired the stories of the journeys of Sinbad the Sailor, the tales of King Solomon's mines, the writings of Ibn Battuta? This is the land from which Mansa Abubakar set sail to export our culture and civilization to the Americas. Did you not know that the first African Americans were explorers, not slaves? Did you not know that Africa was not born on its knees? Tell me, how can we forget the names of our ancestors, of Hatshepsut, of Mutota, of Sundiata? How can we forget those African gods that survived the slave crossing to take root and flourish in the jungles of Brazil and Colombia, so that today Obatala is deity on both sides of the Atlantic? Tell me, how can we forget Imhotep, that African man who fathered the European god? Tell me, how can we forget the Maroons of Jamaica, the Black Madonna, the struggles that made it possible for a young woman to become princess in the House of Windsor, and for a man, a Black man, to become president of the United States of America? Did you not know? From Tihaka to Malcolm, from Nzinga to Rosa Parks, each time we march for the fall of apartheid, to free Angola, for justice for George Floyd, each time we march to insist, from the American Deep South to the European far right, to insist that Black lives matter. Each time we march, we are channeling the spirit of a continent that has endured the invasion of Assyrians, of Persians, of Greeks, of Romans, of Arabs, of Ottomans, of Europeans, and yet still stands. Did you not know that Africa will not stay on its knees? Thank you.
Thank you, Dike. I can't think of a more profound and powerful way to start this conversation. So it's a real honor to be opened by you with that beautiful poem. So I'll start by introducing you. As you all now know, Dike Chukwumerije is a poet, author, and public speaker. He's the winner of the 2012 The African Poet National Poetry Slam Competition, and the winner of the 2013 Association Nigerian Authors Prize for Prose Fiction. He is the programs director at the Abuja Literary Society, in which role he oversees the organization of weekly literary events, including open mics, book readings, and guest author sessions. He's the CEO of Simply Poetry Limited, a production company that uses poetry as a medium for engaging in critical socio-political discourse. His spoken word theatre production, Made in Nigeria, has been touring the country since 2016 with visits to over 10 states. Welcome again, Dike. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. It's an honor.
It's an honor to be with you too, and with Tsitsi Dangaremgba, the award-winning author and filmmaker. Welcome, Tsitsi. Her debut novel, Nervous Conditions, won the African section of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 1989. And in 2018, Nervous Conditions was named by the BBC as one of the top 100 books that have shaped the world. She's the director of the Institute of Creative Arts for Progress in Africa Trust. Her first short story, The Letter, was published in 1985 in Sweden. She's written various plays, including The Lost of the Soil and She No Longer Weeps. Tsitsi is the director behind the films Kare Kare Tsvako, Mother's Day, Everyone's Child, and Growing Stronger. She is also an executive director of the organization Women Filmmakers of Zimbabwe and founding director of the Women's Film Festival of Harare. Her latest novel, This Mournable Body, which I cannot recommend highly enough, was shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize. And earlier this year, she was awarded the 2021 PEN Award for Freedom of Expression. We do have one more guest I'm hoping will join us, Shirley Campbell Bar, but she's not here yet. So maybe when Shirley joins us, I will introduce her at that point. And just to introduce myself, my name is Afua Hirsch. I'm an author, broadcaster, documentary maker, and writer. And in the last couple of years, I've made 2 big documentary series about African art and culture and global diasporic history and culture. Enslaved, which I co-presented with Samuel L. Jackson about the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and African Renaissance, which looked at the history and art of Senegal, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And always passionate about conversations about how we can unite, organize, mobilize, and really create connections between our multitude of diverse cultures, histories, and experience organized around our global Blackness and connections to the African continent. So I want to start by asking you, Tsitsi and Dike, about how that journey is going from your perspective, because we're at a time when, and this does sometimes feel circular, especially when you look at the history of the 20th century, we seem to be riding a wave of a new kind of Pan-Africanism, a returneeism, a more overt narrative about people in the diaspora connecting with the African continent. Ghana in particular has really capitalized on this idea of the year of return and sought to attract people who've never been to Africa before to come to Ghana and connect more intimately with its culture and history. Do you feel that this is meaningfully building a new sense of collective consciousness and identity among Black people and among creatives like yourselves? Dike, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think it is contributing to the formation of some sort of awareness of a shared identity. The way different people are connecting over national borders and boundaries by the fact that we share the African continent or descend from the African continent, even though that's, for me, it's also a problematic identity, you know, in terms of what is the shared identity? What is it that we share? You know, but I think that over time, we've really seen an evolution in the way these stories are told. There's greater confidence with which stories like this are being told and owned by people of African descent. There's an evolution in terms of the way the type of stories are being told, the medium with which stories are being told, the source of stories. There was a time where the Black experience was almost synonymous with the African American experience, or dominated by the story of African Americans. And then slowly we're beginning to realize that there is a diaspora in Latin America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, in China, Black people everywhere. And some of these stories are also coming into the mix. And I think it is helping to create that consciousness that we share an identity, or we share a stigma, if nothing else. And so, yes, to answer your question directly, I think it's helping.
Thank you so much there. I want to come back to you, but I want to come to you, Tsitsi, to see how you feel this journey has been going in your lifetime and your creative period.
Yes, thank you very much, Afua. I would agree with Dike. I think that we are continuing to establish these links. And I think it's important to remember that this has been an ongoing process. And I think there have been different waves of the process. At the moment, I know a lot of young people are trying to engage with the whole notion of Pan-Africanism, especially because there are so many young people from the continent who are in the diaspora, and things have changed. Young people have access to communication tools that they didn't have before. So I think digital technology is really helping this sense of identity. But also our thinking has evolved. We are not only rooting ourselves in a common history of stigma. As Dike said, yes, the stigma exists, but we understand that there are many things that we can look to beyond that. Knowledge is increasing. The knowledge of what Africa actually has contributed to the world, to modernity even, is becoming more commonplace. People have access to it also because of the internet, which makes knowledge available. And so I think these are all very sound foundational stones on which we can begin to build. I do think it is important, though, that we interrogate amongst ourselves the areas that we need to interrogate. When we talk about Africa being a continent of stigma or black skin having a stigma, we need to look at it and to ask ourselves, where is the stigma manifesting? And how can this common identity that we are creating be engaged to deal with this stigma? Every stereotype has some kind of root in reality. And so sometimes I feel that we get carried away or put more emphasis on valorizing past and history and this aspect of reaffirming ourselves, which are all very important. But as people who have read my novels will know, reflecting to see where things have not gone the way that maybe would have been a better way is also very important. And I am all for doing that as a great African nation. I was in the United States a couple of years ago, and a professor of history said to me, Tsitsi, we haven't had the conversation yet. The conversation about why did you let us go? And I think that is a very important conversation, because I think that ideas that would emerge from that would also explain some of the things that we see today. I've just done a trip to Zambia and Tanzania, traveling the Livingstone funeral route and doing research for that trip. I realized that a lot of the things that were happening in the middle of the 19th century and around that time are the things that are happening now, except that people were being sold for beads nearly 200 years ago. Today they are being sold for jets and arms. But the nature of the transaction remains very similar, that leaders of this continent are selling their people into misery. So I think we need a common conversation around that too. And I think as Africans, we need to be open to hear what the diaspora will tell us. That might be a touchy thing, but I think that maybe it would be good for us to have a listening ear to that.
Also, so much to pick up on, but I just want to stay with something you said about knowledge and this trip that you've been on through Zambia and Tanzania. Do you feel that as a writer and a creative person writing from an African story, that a large part of your work is educating your audience? Because as Dike's poem reminds us, there's so much ignorance about our story and our context that I wonder if to communicate that effectively, we have to also be constantly educating and teaching. We don't have the luxury of simply expressing in the ways that other people who've managed to have a monopoly over knowledge, other cultures who've dominated education systems and knowledge systems have. Do you feel a sense of having to educate? Does it feel like a burden or an opportunity? And how do you navigate that?
I really love that question. And I'm so glad that you asked it. Thank you. My feeling is that there is not a great difference between education and expression. Narrative will always express, and to that extent that narrative expresses something which is received, it is educating. You know, if I write a poem about daffodils and clouds, the people who read that poem are going to understand that daffodils and clouds are items that we write poems about. They will understand that it is good to contemplate flowers and the sky. That's already a huge education. There are people who don't know that, who don't write poems about whatever flowers they have in their garden. So that's education. So for me, the two go hand in hand. As a person who reacts to what I see around me, I want to express what I see. And that expression will have an impact on the people who receive that expression, and therefore it will be education. Right now, I'm writing a young adult dystopian fiction.
Oh.
And the reason why I started writing it was, first of all, I saw that my son was consuming the Percy Jackson books, and I thought, well, you know, surely we can have some hero of that nature out of Africa. It didn't quite turn out like that, but anyway. And then the second reason is that I needed a mode of expression for what is going on in Zimbabwe today that young people could identify with. So for me, the two are very definitely the same. And I am not sure whether there can be an expression that does not educate. Maybe the issue is the intention or the awareness of whether this expression is educating or not. But I think that in its action, it will always educate, whether it is positive education or negative education.
Thank you so much. Dike, your poem was an education, whether you intended it to be one or not. And in terms of the question, how could we forget? I think so many people listening to that will realize how much they don't know, haven't been taught, haven't been told. Why do you place such an emphasis on telling these stories, communicating this history?
I mean, there is a saying that if you don't sort of know where the rain began to beat you, you can't sort of find your way forward. You sort of have to look back to look forward a bit to get your orientation. And that's the role that culture plays in all of our lives. It gives us a sense of continuity, that we're not just a random spark in the night sky and that dies out, didn't come from anywhere, not going anywhere. So if you have an idea of where you're coming from, it gives you confidence, it gives you purpose. And for me, it was also my own personal development. You know, I was born in Nigeria, grew up in Nigeria. And when you live on the continent, in a country, in a town, in a city, you never really grapple with what it means to be African, because you're dealing with your local circumstances. Many times you need to travel out and then suddenly realize that, hang on, I'm African, I'm Black, sort of in opposition to other cultures you then meet out there. So I had the experience of traveling to the UK to do a master's. And then suddenly surrounded by this culture, I realized, you know what? I know so little about where I am coming from. I know so little about Africa. I wasn't really taught this in school. And it became important to me because when you're, walking through Trafalgar Square, you're looking at all these statues of the British people did this, the British people did that. And you start wondering, okay, so where is Africa in world history? Where are people that look like me in global history? And so I went on a personal journey and started buying books on African history. And I was shocked at how much Africa had contributed to global history, how much the world is the way it is today because of African ingenuity, African courage, so many things that we had done. I remember reading the book, They Came Before Columbus, that sort of talked about the king I talked about, the king of Mali in the 15th century, who sailed the Atlantic Ocean 100 years before Columbus. And I was shocked. I didn't even know that Africans set sail. I didn't know that Africans were adventurers. I didn't know that Africans discovered things. And it gives you confidence in yourself as an African. You suddenly know that you're not your culture, and it also gave me the confidence. Then something must have happened to put us where we are today. And also that gets you interrogating really the impact of slavery and colonialism on the African trajectory. Because the story is told by the conqueror. The story is told by the person that it's like, imagine if Germany had won World War II. How would the story of the Holocaust be told today if Germany had won? It'll probably be told very lightly, and in the end, it really was a way of helping people and things like that. So when you have the story of slavery and colonialism being told by the people that benefited from it, that perpetrated it on you, there's a way the story is told that doesn't really dig into how harmful, what it did to you, how it crippled you, how it took you from where you were going and completely changed your trajectory. So these historical stories are very important to get our bearing as Africans, to understand where we're coming from, so that we can have the confidence to really reach for the future. We are not a backward people. We're not a people that need to be helped or need aid. We are capable from within our ethos, from within our worldview, from within ourselves to reimagine the world. We don't have to follow the templates of the West. There's nothing wrong with it, but there is a reason why there is diversity in humanity, so that each part can contribute what only it can contribute to the big picture. So it's very important that the African personality, the African worldview, the African sensibility is awake, so that humanity can also benefit from what the African brings to the table and those of African descent. So that's why I think these stories are important.
What you're saying really touches on the question of diaspora, about which in the chat there's quite a lively conversation happening about how acceptable even the name is. And I think one of the issues we have actually is the lack of an agreed language for many of the things we talk about, from Blackness to diaspora. What I wonder is whether one of the potential disconnects between people outside the African continent and people in living and working on the African continent is this perspective on what it means to be African, what it means to be Black, what the history is, and that it's something that preoccupies people who are very conscious of being racialized as other in the US or the Caribbean or Europe, and that there is a relationship with the history that becomes personal, this desire to elevate the kings and queens, that whereas all the information people growing up in Europe, for example, ever hear about was Africans as victims or slaves or recipients of aid. But that when you come to the African continent with this preoccupation with your Blackness, your Africanness, with this version of history, you encounter a continent that has different priorities and is still actually experiencing a colonial form of education, but also doesn't need or feel it needs to think about its Blackness or identity in the same way, because it's the majority and it's busy getting on with the work of development. Do you think that is a disconnect between people in the diaspora and people on the continent? Is it hindering this connectedness that we're discussing today?
I had a really interesting exchange today on social media, because someone posted a clip of an interview that Keanu Reeves gave to a young interviewer, and it was about his new film, Keanu Reeves' new film, in which he plays a character which I will call X. So the young interviewer says to Keanu Reeves, so how is it getting back into the cadence and the character of Y? And he repeated Y twice. Meanwhile, Keanu played X. So Keanu very, very gently was able to put him right. He just said, oh, I played X. And the poor young interviewer completely lost it and stood up and walked off. And Keanu said, yes, you've lost all your cred. That's the situation right now. So this went kind of viral with people pointing out how gracious Keanu Reeves had been, which I thought he had been too, but I thought the young man had also been gracious, didn't try to brazen it out and save face and make things worse by doing that. So I retweeted this tweet. And the young man answers and says, oh yes, I see what happened. He made a mistake twice, but I don't see a big deal in that. So I was actually quite shocked about that. So we had an exchange. And the gist of it was that, look, I'm a young Zimbabwean. I'm fighting for my daily bread every single day. Now you want me to be impressed by two people who are sitting in some office in Hollywood talking about their multi-million-dollar films. So I think this is one of the big disconnects that we have, that many of the people who live in the diaspora, probably the majority of them, live in countries that are more economically comfortable than most of the African countries. And I think that this really constrains the way continental Africans can think somehow. It precludes our widening our minds. And I actually think this is strategy. If it was not beneficial to people in power to keep other people poor, then they wouldn't do it. So obviously, just as we can look at our leaders on the continent, some of us, and say, oh, our leaders keep us poor as a strategy of maintaining power. Similarly, we can look at the world structure and say it is very necessary for some countries to keep African countries poor, because that is how they will hold on to power. If African countries were not poor, we would be able to push back and we would equalize. And so I think that we are going to find it difficult to have the conversations we need to have with the diaspora because of that discrepancy in the distribution of wealth. Because it now means that even though I said earlier that knowledge is available, you've got to have your gadget and you've got to have your money for data. And how many of us on the continent have that? So I think that actually economics is going to be one of the key issues that we have to talk around to see how we can manage the situation, talking about creating this identity.
So these problems objectively exist and are huge barriers to the kind of unity and connectedness we're talking about. What is our role as creatives? Because we're not economists, political leaders in this conversation. We're all creatives. What's our role in nurturing this dialogue, in helping bridge these admittedly formidable barriers? Dike, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Dike?
Oh.
No, that's fine. I mean, your first earlier question. Can you hear me? Your
Yes.
earlier question sort of leads into this one. Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. And I was saying that, I mean, it's important to remember that Pan-Africanism itself was conceived,
Yes, Maybe Dike, you can just type and then we can pick up on, let me just say here.
I'm just going to suggest that Dike, you might try and turn your camera off to see if that improves your connection. Do you want to answer the question, Tsitsi, about what our role as creatives is while Dike is coming back to us?
Yeah, yes, Afua. I think that creatives have a huge role to play in that conversation, in directing the narrative and in making the issues behind the narrative accessible to people. And not only accessible, but accessible in a way that is engaging, that is transformational. There is a reason why the narrative of Africa has been suppressed. From the time that Africans were engaged with people whose agenda was to colonize and basically to avail themselves of Africa's resources. Africa has been put in a certain position where it was very difficult for Africans to express their narrative. And in fact, they were even told slaves were not allowed to use their traditional ways of narrative, song, and musical instruments. People were not taught properly. They were just brought up to a certain level of education so that they could serve those new people who had come in. And so this was all to suppress that capacity of being human that we celebrate and which we foster and grow by the way we communicate the world to each other. And so this communicating of the world to each other is absolutely vital for the project we have at hand of Pan-Africanism and consolidating an African identity. I think Dike is back now.
Dike, are you there? I know you've muted your mic, but if your connection's working, come back off mute and yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was saying that, sorry, the connection is bad and there is a rainstorm about to start. I think it's making it worse. But I was going to say that it's important to remember that Pan-Africanism as a concept, my video, yeah. Is that better? Yes. Is the audio coming through better?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was going to say that Pan-Africanism as a concept was sort of originated outside of the continent because it's always been easier for Africans and people of African descent to see their connection when they're outside the continent, because within the continent, that's why at the beginning I said it's important to know what is it that unites us in the first place, because we are quite diverse. Different cultures, different tribes, different languages, different nations. So within the continent, there is a lot that divides people. And then when you add bad governance and what Tsitsi was talking about, the need to sort of get by every day, it becomes very hard for Africans on the continent to be cognizant, to be conscious of that shared identity. But Pan-Africanism is a very important concept on the continent itself, because within many countries, there is a need for people to come together to improve governance within their countries, to improve the state of governance on the African continent. Africans need to pull together. And the fact that Africans are divided on the basis of tribe and religion and class makes it very easy for dictators and tyrants and bad leaders to stay in power. And I have found that one of the things that can be used to unite Africans on the continent is this appeal to the concept of Pan-Africanism, to domesticate it and use it in local politics. And it's very possible for those that know the history and know the connections between peoples, even within their own countries. If you understand African history, it's very easy to begin to spin a narrative that allows, if I use Nigeria, that allows a northerner to make common cause with a southerner, allows an easterner to make common cause with a westerner. Because until the common victims of bad governance, the common victims of bad roads, no light, no water, no hospitals, no schools, are able to stand together regardless of religion and ethnicity, will never get better. Used to make common cause across and across religious and ethnic lines is Pan-Africanism. So it's very important that that concept of Pan-Africanism is domesticated and used by reformers within the continent for local domestic purposes. It's important. I don't know if I came across it all.
Yes, no, thank you, Dike, you did. And there's a contribution in the chat from Bibi Bakari Youssef, who I'm sure many of you know, who's reminded us of a James Baldwin quote, which for what, beyond the fact that all Black men and women at one time or another left Africa or have remained there, what do they really have in common? His response, what they held in common was their precarious, their unutterably painful relation to the white world. What they held in common was their necessity to make the world in their own image, to impose this image on the world and no longer be controlled by the vision of the world and of themselves. What in some Black people held in common was their ache to come into the world as men, and this ache united people who might otherwise have been divided as to what man should be. And that quote really reminds me of when I suppose we talk about what Blackness and Africanness means in a global context of the pain that unites Black people. But it doesn't so much speak to the Black joy and the richness of culture that unites Black people. And I suppose often when you see the global Black discourse, it is focused on pain because there has been so much of it and much of the history of it has been suppressed. But in terms of the positive content of global Blackness, what again is the role of creatives, and not just in the conversation about identity, but also in the conversation about development, in how African economies, and obviously they're so different and diverse, how they are developing and how the continent is moving forward. What are your thoughts on that, Tsitsi?
Afua, I agree with you that we need to move beyond the pain. But the reality is that that idea is something that has to be acted upon. We cannot move beyond the pain if we do not accept that there is something beyond the pain and put all our energy and resources and creativity into manifesting that thing. And while we want to do this, all those forces that I spoke about are making sure that we remain in the pain. I understand that one of the Hollywood actresses, I think it was Lupita Nyong'o, was told when she went for an audition that people preferred her as a slave, or was it for the Oscars, in one of the films that she did after 12 years a slave. People told her, she didn't get the Oscar, although she was nominated, and people told her, we prefer you as a slave. You're in that part of the world, you could probably actually give me the proper facts, but that's the outline of the story. So there are immense forces that are trying to keep us in that box. I myself am writing a film that's based on the story of a Black French woman who was a figure skater. And she never won the world championship. And my reading of this was that although she won the Europeans often, when it came to the worlds, it was like the actual pinnacle of achievement that would have been possible for her. And one of the things that she did was that one of her dances was based on the cancan, the French dance. And she competed with somebody from Eastern Europe, or maybe it was even Russia or the Soviet Union at that time, who would dance Swan Lake on the ice, part of that heritage of the north of this world. And she would always be beaten by a few points on the aesthetic elements. So my script is that she finds a way to overcome this issue, and it's fundamentally a psychological issue, that she finds a way to incorporate African dance movements into her routines and does extremely well. So that's the simplistic version of my film. Nobody wants to know. Nobody wants to know. And when I send it to people, they say, well, why should she win the world championship? This is feedback I get from people. I have another script. I'm adapting a novel in which a South African journalist of Indian background who has very dark skin wins great journalism prizes in the United States. And again, the question is, okay, why can't he just win another prize? Why should it be the big prize? So you see, we are not even allowed to see ourselves performing well. The Queen of Katwe is a really interesting example. This is about a young girl who lives in a slum in Kampala. For those who haven't seen it, I'll just briefly say what the film is about. One of the teachers decides he has to keep the school children occupied, well occupied, and teaches them chess. This girl goes on to be really good at chess and reaches really world level. So some researchers in the United Kingdom did a study on this film, and they took children who were going to write a maths exam in Kampala, and they showed some of these children the Queen of Katwe. The control group was shown another ordinary film. I think it was some fantasy, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children or such. And then they measured the success rate on the exam. And the children who had watched the Queen of Katwe, where there was a black child that they could identify with, who came out of their own neighborhood, places that they could relate to, who then went on to be this amazing chess player, those children performed better. So there is a reason why we are not able to tell the stories that we need to tell, that would be part of engaging with the situation. The solution, in my opinion, is to have wealthy Africans educated about the need to engage with the symbolic development, the internal, creative, psychological, imaginary development of the continent. You know, because now all we want to do is keep safe and get up tomorrow, most of us, maybe 90% of us, keep safe and live to breathe the next day. So where can you even begin to start imagining about people across oceans who you think live a much better life than you? Because we don't know. We don't see their stories anyway. The real stories about life on the other side of these oceans are not the stories we see. We see what Netflix is giving us now. That's what we have. Or we see Nollywood. But we don't see the stories that could actually build us into the kind of nation who could have this formidable presence in the world.
I can really relate to what you're saying, Tsitsi, and as somebody who also works in TV, you find that you can progress as a Black writer or producer or director, but you still come up against the same gatekeepers who still want to see stories that are familiar to them because they put Black people and Black characters in recognizable categories, not transcendent ones that challenge the way we see ourselves and other people see us. I just want to pause there, though. Sorry. Yeah.
You know, this is the whole point about Africa is or was the dark continent, so we know it. You know, because it is like that. And therefore they have to have the narratives that reinforce their knowledge of Africa being like that. It hasn't ended. It might be changing very slightly, but it's up to us to put those resources that we have. We have billionaires on the continent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I just want to also welcome our final panelists. Shirley, are you there? Yes, hi. I'm really happy to welcome Shirley Campbell Bar to the event. Can you hear me, Shirley?
Yes, I can hear you. And I'm so sorry that I couldn't join before. It was a misunderstanding for me, but I'm here and I'm happy to join.
It's really wonderful to have you here. I'll just introduce you quickly and then I'll bring you right into the conversation. I know you've been watching a bit of it in the background. Shirley Campbell Bar studied drama, literature, and creative writing in her native Costa Rica. She's an anthropologist from the University of Costa Rica and took postgraduate courses in African feminism at the University of Zimbabwe. She holds a master's degree in international cooperation. She's lived and worked in Zimbabwe, El Salvador, Honduras, Jamaica, Brazil, the United States, and Panama, and traveled extensively in Latin America and several African countries. She's published 6 collections of poetry and has dozens of poems and articles published in magazines, anthologies, and journals in different countries. An activist of the Afro-descendant movement in Latin America, she regularly participates in conferences, workshops, lectures, and poetry readings, sharing her work and contributing to the process of awareness within Afro-descendant communities. And it's actually perfect timing, Shirley, to welcome you, because we've been speaking about diasporan identities and relationships with Blackness and the African continent in the diaspora. And we've been missing your voice as somebody who really is so influential in Afro-descendant communities in Latin America. Could you tell us how you feel those communities are connecting with the African continent now, and whether there's a shift that you're detecting in that journey?
Well, as I always say, well, thank you very much for the invitation. For me, it's an honor to be a part of a conversation with African writers. Since we've been in this other part of the world, trying to connect, I say, not necessarily through material ways, but through our production. We've come a long way. I always say, as a diaspora, as a writers, as an artist in the diaspora, it's been like we have to build our identity, to build from zero. And I have to say that I'm really sure that it's been definitely a shift since we really have built a more strong movement of people of the diaspora, and then connecting with Africa for us. It means to build our identity. We grew up with nothing, without. We always say that we grew up like without a mother, without something to relate to, because our education never connect us to Africa, where we always knew that there has to be a place where we can feel accepted, where we can feel like we are home. But the system, our environment never ever gave us the tools for us to connect with that. The latest, I think that with the globalization, I could say that, and I put that on the globalization made us, gave us the opportunity of connect. Even though we've been connecting, when I say that we've been connecting, it's because, when you grew up with nothing, knowing that there's something, we writers, if you do a trip with all the writings of writers of the diaspora. When I'm talking about diaspora, I'm talking about Brazil, Uruguay, Mexico, Costa Rica, Estados Unidos, all the countries of the diaspora. We will find in all our writings and art manifestations, you will find the presence of Africa. You will find the need of connecting. You will find for us, it's been always important. And we always felt, let me tell you, that we were like the child of Africa that Africa did not recognize as a child that once were left, not really left, we were taken from home and placed in
Oh, have we all lost Shirley? It's not just my connection.
another part of
Oh, Shirley, you're
the
back.
world with no connection with that. Okay. Okay. I'm listening. I'm
No,
really.
you're back. You're back. You're back. I lost you for a moment.
Is unstable. Okay. Because the movement of the Black communities in Latin America is growing. It's been growing. Connections and the now we really have feel that we've been recognized for Africa, because that's important for us. Be aware that Africa knows that we are here, that we are in a struggle, that we've been in a struggle for the last 400 years, and we've been reflecting that in our manifestations, writings, art manifestations, etc., etc. Definitely, it's been a shift. Definitely, we've been connecting. Definitely, the possibility for us to visit Africa, because the last 10, 15 years, more and more people from Latin America, especially, has been visiting Africa, has been connecting with different countries in Africa. That has definitely been transforming the way we see Africa, and we believe the way Africa see us. I've lived in Zimbabwe, and I've visited several countries in Africa. And when I lived in Zimbabwe, one of the things that I noticed, it was that the people did not know much about us, and we've been yearning for Africa our whole lives, and they didn't know much about us. They didn't know where. I don't know. It's funny, because we felt like, we've been for us, going to Africa was always like a believing that we were going home. Africa was our home in our dreams, really, in our dreams, because we never imagined that we could get there. But in our writings, since I don't know since when, we've been reflecting the need and the culture, the identity, the necessity of being part of something bigger than us, because we never belong really in Latin America. We've been always marginalized, placed in corners. We've been always the base of the pyramid. So we knew that there was a place where we will feel like being home. And definitely the last 30 years, the last 20 years, the last 10 years, the last year, it's been like an opening of a huge window, of many doors for us to connect with our home, in many senses.
Thank you, Shirley. It's so incredible to hear you. And I'm thinking, actually, as you speak, of my favorite Kwame Nkrumah quote, which is, "I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." And I can so relate to that sense of growing up away from the continent, but feeling such a deep rooted connection to it and yearning for it. And as creatives, we have the power to rebirth this idea of what our Blackness means, what our Africanness means. So I suppose, as we are coming towards the end of the event, I want to ask you all, what work we as creative people can do to create this sense of identity or common goals that unites us across such diverse experiences, perspectives, and cultures, because it's also the case that we haven't seen each other. I think there has been a monopoly over what the idea of the diaspora means. When I was growing up, it was to be African American or Jamaican. We didn't see people in Brazil or Costa Rica. To be African meant to be West African. We didn't see people in Zimbabwe, or people in East or Southern Africa didn't necessarily see people in West Africa. We've been divided by design, and we all know the legacy of slavery and colonialism was to create those boundaries so that there can't be this unity. So what work can we do? I'd like to come to you first, Dike. Dike, are you there? If you are and you're just doing audio, you're on mute. So I'll come back to you, Dike. Can I come to you, Tsitsi? I can see that you're there.
Yes, we have our work cut out for us. I think the work that we have to do is to narrate our truth in the various ways that we do it, whatever our genre is, whether it's visual, whether it's music, whether it's dance. But we must narrate our truth from that point of being an African person today. And I think if we do that, we will connect with the other African person, because when we do that, we express something that is very fundamental to our being. And so that fundamental thing will have a counterpart that can receive it in somebody who has some of that experience also. This is not to say that other people cannot be affected by it who don't have that experience of connection to Africa. They can, because it's also human. And testament to that is the fact that novels by people of African descent are read all over the world. But I think that that connection to each other will be strengthened. The other issue, though, is that we have to understand that our creative expression takes place within an economic context. I come back again to the issue of economics, where there are certain distribution systems, and those distribution systems do not really enable well the movement of our creative goods amongst us. We need to also understand the cost of those creative goods, who has access to them. We have to find ways of overcoming this. And so I return again to a point I made earlier, that we have to find ways of persuading wealthy Africans to invest in the imaginary of the continent. I can remember talking to one of our very wealthy Africans at a gathering in London, and trying to convince him that although a piece of art has a symbolic imaginary value, it also has an economic value. And I could see his eyes glaze over as I was trying to talk about that. This was like around 10 years ago, and I think that even the least interested person now understands that creative content has a commercial value. But now we have to find ways of bringing them into the industry in a way that promotes our goals and not the goals of the gatekeepers who still exist. We have to find those narratives that can get through to the populations we want to talk to through other routes, because if they go through those gatekeepers, they will probably not be the kind of narrative that could enhance us as much as we would like and as much as we need. Just to give you an example from my 2018 novel, This Mournable Body, I had sent that to so many agents, and nobody had wanted to read it. until I started putting extracts of it on Facebook in absolute despair. And that's when the woman who became my editor, who is originally from Zimbabwe, she lives sometimes in America and sometimes in England. She's based in England now. But she was the person who then said, Tsitsi, I'm going to help you with this. Let me read it. And if I like it, I will find a way to help you. So she read it. And because she was Zimbabwean, she understood what I was saying. And she understood, because she's in the industry, she understood ways of speaking to other people who don't have that experience in a way that enables them to understand and to take the project on. And also she was able to go to the right people. Out of all the array of people, she knew the little niche where that work would be appreciated. Her name is Ella Wakatama Orfi. And if it hadn't been for her, this mournable body would never have seen the light of day. So we have to understand that there are huge forces that are ranged against us as people of African descent wanting to forge our identity in order to be a force in this world. The current forces will obviously push back. And so I cannot stress enough that it is up to us to forge the links, not only the creative links, but also the resource links that are going to enable us to do this important work.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking that this is where identity becomes something that's not just esoteric, but tangible, because if you self-identify as someone with common cause with other Black women who are seeking visibility or a platform for their work, then you are more incentivized to go the extra mile to publish work that on merit should be being published. But as we all know, it's never been a level playing field. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That's it's a powerful story for all writers out there who know what it means to be rejected, even when you have something that ultimately goes on to be a hugely successful book, as this mournable body did. I'm going to try you, Dike. Are you there? Has the storm given you enough reprieve to give us your final word? Okay, I think the weather may have won out over Dike for now, but if you are able to come back to us, I know you'll let me know. So I'll come back to you, Shirley. You are, I know, busy doing the work of raising the voice of the Afro-descendant community. But here in this space with so many people from so many different countries, different relationships to their Africanness, what is your message about the work that needs to be done to really, as coming back to the main topic of this event, is actually a very practical one? How can we leverage our connectedness to actually serve our common cause as people of African descent globally?
Well, we have to never forget that there's a common cause, and we have to know each other. We have to know our struggles, and us as creators, as creators, but also as representatives in any area of the human development. We have to exchange exchange our needs, and know that we have a common history, and we have to raise awareness of that. We have to be able to know what you are doing in Africa, and you have to be able to know what we are doing here, because we need you as a support in what we are doing. We need you as a political partners in what we are doing. We are all political entities, and and we as writers have a responsibility to raise our issues, to use our platforms to raise our issues. We in Latin America, we have that very clear. that the literature is as a platform to raise our voices, to raise awareness of our situation in Latin America and Africa, and the writers of Africa, the creators of Africa, will be really a support for us in our cause. And we have to, this is a good time because we have these sort of platforms. We don't need to see each other to establish links, to establish, to open possibilities for us to be together. So it is important for me to know what you're doing, for you to know what we are doing, to publish together, to talk about issues that affect us commonly, the African writers, African women, Africans, and the diaspora. So I think that is very important to recognize that and use our platforms to raise our voices. The Plan 2063 of the African Union declared the diaspora as the sixth region of Africa. We are, and we have to use those tools to raise awareness and to become closer.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you so much. Dike, I don't give up easily.
Yes. Sorry, it's been crazy, but yes, I think that as you know, we as writers have a very important role to play in creating
Dike, oh, cliffhanger. That was a cliffhanger to end on. Okay, well, I feel as if Dike is also reminding us that we still have our infrastructure and technical challenges, but we can overcome them. And you've all heard Dike's poem, and I know you'll all now be checking for his work, which speaks so powerfully to this subject. So Dike, thank you for trying. I hope you ride out the storm. And I'm going to close now. It's been an unforgettable hour and more for me. I'm so happy that we managed to have contributors that really represent a spread of regions, countries, diasporic experiences and identities. And as Shirley reminds us, the diaspora is the sixth region of the African continent. And I hope you've all come away from this with a sense of how really asking the question, I think, is the important thing. How can we leverage our connectedness, and how can we think about our collective cause so that we can work intentionally towards it? I'd like to give a major shout out to the Africa Soft Power Project and to Nkiru, who is doing such phenomenal work, bringing us together, keeping these conversations alive, raising the profile and visibility of these crucial discussions. And so thank you so much. And I'll hand over to you to close, Nkiru. Really asking the question, I think, is the important thing. How can we leverage our connectedness, and how can we think about our collective cause so that we can work intentionally towards it? I'd like to give a major shout out to the Africa Soft Power Project and to Nkiru, who is doing
fabulous.
Did you really want to hear me twice?
I think technology has really done it today. It's been the crazy. It's been the craziest, but this has been like a phenomenal session. Thank you so much, Tsitsi. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Dike. Afua, you've been wonderful. Like, this is just like on a different level. And this is what the conversation about Africa Soft Power is, you know, what we're trying to do at Africa Soft Power. Obi and I are really passionate about this, about connecting us, about, you know, building bridges between us, about seeing our brothers and sisters in the global diaspora, particularly in, you know, not just in America, not just in the UK, but in Latin America, in Brazil, in Costa Rica, and other places that Shirley talked about that we don't normally think of because we're sort of like in our own space and thinking about only ourselves. So Shirley, you were really inspiring. Thank you for making it. Tsitsi, again, like, thank you so much. And Dike, I wish you could be here to the end. Your poem was fantastic, and we'll share it with, you know, with everybody today. Obi, do you want to say some closing words? Thanks, Obi.
No, I just wanted to say it was an incredible session. Thanks so much, Afua, for incredible moderation. Shirley, thanks for coming on late. Dike, sorry about your tech. Tsitsi, there were just so many deep points being made. I mean, maybe the most important thing of all was just about better connection and learning ourselves better, learning our history better, because I think there's clearly big gaps both on the continent and in our global diaspora. So, but I mean, I just felt really positive about this panel and the conversation. Thanks a lot, everybody. And thanks to the audience.
Yeah, thank you to the audience. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye, guys. Afua, thanks. Bye. See you guys later.
Thank you so much to the panel and to everyone watching. Bye.
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 Okay, sorry about your tech.